Welcome. Today we're going to talk about a book called Reclaimed by Andy Steiger. Now, I suppose two things up front. I actually know Andy from years ago. I haven't seen him in years, but I put his deck on once when we were supposed to do some housework together. And his wife, got pregnant, was having their baby. So I did it for him. Number two, I came to this book after I read the God Delusion. So I come from a faith background, and I had at least one comment and a few people email me after I read the God Delusion and said basically, hey, I like to see someone of faith wrestling with atheism. I'm an atheist. Do you have anything that I could wrestle with on the faith side? And I said, I didn't know. And then my wife said, hey, Andy just got out this new book. And Andy, one of the things he does is apologetics, which is the defense of faith. So I bought his book and read it on vacation. And today I'm going to talk about his book, Reclaimed by Andy Steiger. If you want to support this channel, keep book reviews coming. There's two ways to do that. You can go to patreon.com/CurtisMcHale and support the channel. Or number two, you can go to curtismchale.ca/Skillshare and learn about TickTick, my task manager of choice. I focus on Mac OS, iOS, because that's what I have, but it really is just like it's the same for pretty much everything outside of, Siri and shortcuts. Buckle up. The main purpose of Steiger's book, I'm going to try and call him Steiger like I do with normal authors, but he's a friend, so Andy. His book is to show that living without God leads to dehumanization and living with God leads to humanization. Now, he does this by trying to answer four questions. Number one is, what is a human? Number two is, what is the value of human life? Number three is, what leads to human flourishing? Number four, how should humans live? And he does this by addressing that in pairs of chapters. One of the chapters attempts to show that living without God and answering this question leads to dehumanization, and living with God and answering this question leads to humanization. I'm actually not going to tackle the questions specifically. On that front, I felt that I had a hard time. I had to continually go back and say, what questions are you supposed to be answering? And then look at the chapter. I didn't feel like they related as tightly, at least to me, as I went through the book. I did find a lot of stuff that, on the good point, where I think he's right, and then a few on the, not even the bad point. The point where I think if you accept the argument, you have to accept a whole bunch of other arguments, which I don't think most atheists are going to accept. One of the points that I really agreed with in this book was when Steiger says that we're at a point in history where it's far more difficult to look past differences and find any common ground with each other. I mean, you can see this. I see this in the whole world right now, right? Specifically in the US, you can see how we're not finding any common ground with people around us, that it's a lot of polarization happening, that people are fighting each other a lot, that there's no we can agree on some points and disagree on some points, and that's okay. And we all easily fall into the confirmation bias that's surrounding this, right? Where we only look for stuff that supports our arguments, supports our existing beliefs. And Christians especially, I think, do this. So growing up in a Christian house, Christian belief, it's easy to fall into what was often called the Christian bubble, where the only people you ever talk to are people that agree with you. And I think that, while it's happened for Christians in the past very easily, it's happening to everyone very, very easily right now. Another thing that Steiger says that I can 100% agree with is that it's always easy to think that atrocities are happening elsewhere. So say in Myanmar, some other country that's not North America, we say, oh, how bad are these things that happen over here? I'm so glad we live in North America. When I read The Underground Girls of Kabul, they'll be link above, link below. One of the things that I was left thinking as I read the book is, okay, yeah, it's more in your face, the poor treatment of women in Kabul, in Afghanistan, in many other places. But we still hold a lot of the same beliefs in North America. We just disguise it better, right? Reading Invisible Women, thinking back to that book, thinking that we don't design anything for women. We view male as a default, right? From the size of door handles to how we light our buildings, how the temperature of our buildings is built on the 1960s man in a suit, not the current man not wearing a suit probably, or women at all. And like it goes, like continues to go further, right? You hear, like my wife goes running, men catcall. Like, how is that okay? So we really just disguise it under, and we put the same ugliness in a better suit. That's it. That's all we do here. I don't think that we do any better ultimately at the end of the day than Afghanistan. We're just making it look better. On the same thread, Steiger says that the tongue is a potent vehicle for breaking people down, and that we're currently in a world where the weaponization of words just reaches so much farther. And we say that, we're way better than a Nazi propaganda machine, but like really, when you look at most of what people are saying about each other, can you really say that in good faith? I think you have to ignore a lot of what people say about each other, sometimes even what we say about each other, to believe that. One of the threads through iGen was that it's easy, and iGen is about teens right now, is that it's easy to dehumanize people when you interact online and don't see the reactions on their face of the words you're saying. And we're seeing like that writ large in society. It's really easy to tear someone down, to say something mean, to just throw some words out into the ether at somebody and not see that they're a human being. And it sucks. Like we're continuing to dehumanize each other through that. Now onto some of the things that I think that Steiger made an argument that relied too much on any type of faith or on ignoring a lot of the ill that Christians have done and continue to do. First off, Steiger claims that in order to see our humanity and the humanity of neighbors, we need to have God in our lives. So I saw two arguments against this in previous reading. Number one is the God Delusion, where Dawkins effectively argued that, and with statistics, that Christians are kind of no better than anybody else. They're not more moral. They don't make better decisions. They don't, adhere to rules better. They're just kind of like people. And then the second mountain was another one where it showed that faith produces very few truly, air quotes, good people. And both of these arguments just push back on what Steiger says when he says you have to have God to have humanization, because it shows that Christians really don't do any better. And it also felt in there that Steiger really wanted us to give what Richard Dawkins would call undeserved respect to religion, where religion kind of gets a pass because it is religion. Steiger also made what's called a NOMA argument, which is non-overlapping magisteria. And he literally said it like this, where he said what he said was, it's like science speaks to one type of thing and faith speaks to another. Now, the problem with that is you see people say that, and then if you listen long enough to people of faith, you really hear them say, oh, but here's some statistics that show I'm right. Like, okay, but that's science again. So you're pulling in statistics when you want and ignoring them when you don't, because they don't speak to the type of thing I'm speaking about. Now, Steiger actually says that while these things don't meet, they shouldn't. He says that at location in your Kindle 462, but at location 1993, he says that science needs to be free to draw whatever conclusions it needs to draw, regardless of what the opinion of government is, but regardless of what the opinion of people are, and they need to do that on our own. And Dawkins, atheists would totally agree with this. It does. And then they would say, but you always give religion undeserved respect, right? There's no proof of it yet. We're supposed to believe it. We are supposed to disprove it as people that aren't religious, as opposed to any other vein of knowledge where it's like, no, that new knowledge, this thing that's unknown, has to prove to us that it is worthwhile, that it is true. I think a lot of people would say here that Christians are totally willing to believe any shred of evidence that points to their beliefs, and anything else they just ignore, which is, again, really one of those polarizing views, right? Now, since this book is about humanization, dehumanization, Steiger makes a lot of points in the book where Christians are leading the charge against dehumanization, against turning people into numbers or nothing and then treating them like non-humans. What he totally ignores, though, or that's not true, not totally ignores, we'll come to that, though. He mostly ignores that, there was the Crusades, the Spanish Inquisition, witch trials. Like any of the bad stuff Christians have done, he pretty much ignores. He has one sentence that I found, because I started thinking this fairly early, one sentence that I found where he talks about Canadian Christians failing with the residential schools, which he totally did. And that's it. But he continues to cite a lot of stuff that non-Christians did that was terrible and say, look, dehumanization. And doesn't look at kind of any of the times that it was Christians leading the charge to dehumanization, right? I mean, most of the world was Christians when you're putting people of color, black people specifically, in zoos, or when you had slavery going. Like, this is all dehumanization. And he just doesn't cite that. He cites, but the Nazis, they weren't Christians. Like, okay, great. Like, we're talking zebras here, right? Going back to a zebratic argument, which is a random argument that just happens. Yeah, sometimes you're walking through, out here, sometimes I'm walking through the farm fields and I see something that's, 4 legs, it's running fast. I've got some hair on the back of it, and I think, oh, that's a horse, because it's a horse. Every once in a while, it might be a zebra. In Africa, it'd be like a horsey argument, I guess, or where there's zebras. Anyway, zebratic arguments. And he doesn't really address well all the ill that Christians have done. I actually think that if he had talked more about this and how, if he had dove more into those hard topics, that it could have been a stronger book, depending on where he went with it. As it stands, he seemed to give Christian that undeserved respect for, or kind of that gloss over for all the stuff that they've done that's terrible, while focusing very heavily on what non-Christians have done that leads to dehumanization. My final question is always, should you read Reclaimed by Andy Steiger? Now, I think that if you're an atheist looking for this will be like a really strong apologetics book that, might make me think about my lack of faith or my non-belief, I don't think this is the book, because he doesn't go past saying, using the Bible as the source of truth. And if you're unwilling to accept at that point, then the rest of his arguments just fall down. I don't think that there's any other argument here that's strong enough for you to really say, yep, absolutely, okay, I have to think now. In the same way that working through Dawkins' book made me think. If you're a Christian, then I think you'll read through the book and you'll feel reaffirmed in your faith and you'll love Andy's arguments. And I'm still not sure you should read it, though, because if it's only affirming your arguments, then maybe you should read something from, the quote-unquote other side to challenge you. So I might recommend The God Delusion instead, since that's, the only book of that type that I've really read so far. That's it. Overall, I think Andy wrote a pretty good book. I'm just not sure that it's going to move the needle for anyone that's not of faith. If you like this review, this talk about a book, then you can go below and hit thumbs up, and that's helpful. You can leave a comment. You can also hit subscribe and the bell, and maybe YouTube's going to let you know when a video happens, but at least, they're more likely then. And there's 2 other ways you can support the channel. Number 1 is to go to patreon.com/CurtisMcHale, where you can support the channel. Number 2 is to go to curtismchale.ca/Skillshare and take my course on TickTick, which is my task manager of choice. Have an excellent day.